Look, we've all been there. Someone says something so profoundly stupid that your blood pressure spikes faster than Bitcoin in 2021. Your inner voice is screaming, your jaws clenched, and you're about 2 seconds away from unleashing a verbal apocalypse that would make Gordon Ramsay say, "Hey, maybe dial it back a little." But here's the kicker. The Stoics figured out 2,000 years ago that sounding angry doesn't make you powerful. It makes you predictable. And predictable people? They lose. Every single time. Today, I'm breaking down 7 Stoic-inspired phrases that'll make you sound like the wisest person in the room while everyone else is melting down like a popsicle in July. These aren't your grandmother's inspirational quotes. These are tactical communication weapons that'll have people thinking you've got life figured out while you're secretly just using ancient philosophy to avoid sounding like a toddler who missed nap time. Let's get into it. Phrase number 1, I see your perspective. Now, before you roll your eyes and think I'm about to serve you some corporate HR manual nonsense, hear me out. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who literally ran the Roman Empire while writing one of history's most influential journals, had a crazy realization. Just because someone's opinion makes you want to throw your phone into a lake doesn't mean acknowledging it will kill you. When you say, I see your perspective, you're not agreeing. You're not surrendering. You're doing something far more powerful. You're refusing to participate in the emotional cage match the other person's trying to drag you into. Think about it. When someone's worked up and ready to argue, they're expecting resistance. They're braced for combat. But when you calmly acknowledge their viewpoint, it's like showing up to a duel with a cup of tea. They don't know what to do with that. The Stoics called this sympathia, the understanding that we're all connected, all flawed, all operating from our own limited perspectives. Epictetus, who went from slave to one of history's most respected philosophers, put it brilliantly, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But he wasn't just talking about being polite. He understood that people who master their reactions master their lives. Here's the real genius of this phrase, it buys you time. While the other person's amygdala is firing like a broken smoke alarm, yours is cool as a cucumber. You're operating from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that doesn't make decisions you'll regret at 3 in the morning. You're playing chess while they're playing checkers. And the best part? They'll walk away thinking you're impossibly calm and collected, when really you just refuse to take the bait. But acknowledging someone's perspective is just the opening move. Because once you've disarmed them with understanding, you need to know how to set boundaries without sounding like you're declaring war. Which brings us to phrase number 2, and trust me, this one's a game changer. Phrase number 2, that's one way to look at it. Oh, this one's sneaky good. It's the verbal equivalent of deflecting a punch in slow motion while maintaining eye contact. You're not arguing. You're not even disagreeing technically. You're just acknowledging that multiple realities can exist simultaneously, which, plot twist, is actually a fundamental principle of Stoic philosophy. Seneca, the guy who was both obscenely wealthy and obscenely wise, a rare combination by the way, spent years studying how different people perceive the same events completely differently. He watched the same senators who praised his advice one day condemn him the next. He learned that perspective isn't truth, it's just the angle you're viewing truth from. And here's where it gets interesting. When you say, that's one way to look at it, you're essentially saying, I'm not threatened by your opinion, without sounding like you just graduated from a weekend meditation retreat. This phrase works because it's non-confrontational but not weak. It's the conversational equivalent of water, flexible, adaptable, impossible to pin down. Bruce Lee, who was heavily influenced by Stoic and Eastern philosophy, said, be like water. This phrase is you being like water. Someone throws a rigid opinion at you, you just flow around it. But here's the real power move. This phrase forces critical thinking. When you respond with, that's one way to look at it, you're subtly suggesting there are other ways to look at it without having to explain yourself. You're planting a seed of doubt in their certainty, which is way more effective than trying to bulldoze their position with facts and logic. Because let's be honest, nobody ever won an argument with facts and logic. People don't change their minds because you prove them wrong. They change their minds when they discover new perspectives on their own terms. The Stoics understood something most people still haven't figured out. You can't control other people's thoughts. You can't control their reactions. The only thing you can control, is your own judgments and responses. So why waste energy trying to change someone's mind when you can just acknowledge their view, maintain your composure, and walk away with your blood pressure intact? Now, those first 2 phrases handle the passive resistance beautifully. But what happens when someone's actively trying to provoke you? When they're fishing for a reaction like it's their full-time job? That's when phrase number 3 becomes your new best friend. Phrase number 3, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Appreciate? I don't appreciate anything about what they just said. I appreciate peace and quiet and people who don't say dumb things. Fair. But here's the thing, this phrase isn't about genuine appreciation. It's about strategic detachment. It's about being so emotionally untouchable that even the most inflammatory comment just bounces off you like a rubber ball hitting a brick wall. Epictetus had this wild teaching where he said that if someone insults you, they're not actually hurting you, they're revealing their own character. Think about that. Someone calls you incompetent? That says nothing about your competence and everything about their need to feel superior. Someone questions your intelligence? That's their insecurity talking, not your reality. When you say, I appreciate you sharing that with me, you're doing something psychologically brilliant. You're reframing their attack as a gift. You're treating their aggression like they just handed you a participation trophy. You'll smile, say thanks, and immediately forget it exists. It completely defuses the power dynamic they were trying to establish. Here's a real-world example. Imagine your coworker, let's call him Derek, because there's always a Derek, decides to publicly critique your project in a meeting. You might have gotten defensive, might have fired back, might have spent the next 3 hours crafting the perfect comeback in your head while accomplishing absolutely nothing. But Stoic you? You look Derek dead in the eye and say, I appreciate you sharing that perspective with me, Derek. And then you move on. No explanation. No justification. No emotional investment whatsoever. What just happened? Derek expected a fight. He was ready for drama. Instead he got gratitude? His brain short-circuits. The room moves on. And you? You just demonstrated more emotional intelligence in 5 seconds than Derek's shown in his entire career. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. This phrase is that principle in action. You're choosing not to be harmed by refusing to engage with the harmful intent behind someone's words. Alright, we're 3 phrases deep, and you're already sounding wiser than 90% of people on the internet. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the next phrase isn't just about deflecting negativity, it's about redirecting entire conversations like you're some kind of communication Jedi. Phrase number 4, help me understand your thinking. Now this one? This is psychological jujitsu at its finest. Instead of meeting force with force, you're using curiosity as a weapon. And yes, I said weapon because make no mistake, this phrase is tactical as hell. The Stoics were obsessed with understanding. Not because they were naive people-pleasers who thought everyone was secretly good inside, but because they recognized that understanding is power. When you understand someone's reasoning, you can predict their behavior. When you can predict their behavior, you're 10 steps ahead. Sun Tzu would be proud. But here's the beautiful part. When you ask someone to explain their thinking, one of 2 things happens. Either they realize their logic is Swiss cheese and start backpedaling, or they actually articulate something valuable that gives you insight into their worldview. Either way, you win. You either get to watch them dismantle their own argument without lifting a finger, or you gain information that makes you more effective in future interactions. Socrates, not technically a Stoic but definitely in the same philosophical neighborhood, built his entire teaching method around asking questions. He didn't lecture. He didn't argue. He just kept asking why, until people either achieved enlightenment or wanted to throw him off a cliff. Spoiler alert, they eventually chose option 2, but his method lived on because it works. When you say, help me understand your thinking, you're also doing something subtly brilliant. You're forcing the other person to slow down and actually think. Most people operate on autopilot, spewing opinions they've never examined. By asking them to explain their reasoning, you're making them confront whether they even have reasoning. It's like holding up a mirror, except instead of showing them their face, you're showing them their logic. Or lack thereof. And here's the kicker. This phrase makes you look thoughtful and mature, even if internally you think their idea is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. You're not dismissing them. You're not being condescending. You're genuinely, or at least appearing to genuinely, trying to understand. That level of emotional maturity is so rare that people will respect you for it, even if they can't articulate why. But understanding someone's thinking is one thing. Actually agreeing to disagree without it turning into World War III? That's where phrase number 5 becomes absolutely essential. Phrase number 5, we can disagree on this. Simple, direct, powerful. This phrase is the verbal equivalent of dropping the mic and walking away, except you're doing it with such grace that nobody even realizes you just ended the conversation. Here's what most people don't understand about disagreements. They don't need resolution. They don't need a winner and a loser. They don't need 3 hours of debate followed by resentment that lasts until next. Thanksgiving. Sometimes, hear me out, it's perfectly okay to just disagree. The Stoics had this concept called preferred indifference. Basically, there are things you might prefer one way or another, but they're not essential to your character or happiness. You prefer vanilla ice cream over chocolate? Cool. Someone else prefers chocolate? Also cool. Your preference doesn't make you morally superior, and neither does theirs. Most disagreements fall into this category, but people treat them like theological warfare. Marcus Aurelius governed one of history's largest empires. He dealt with senators, generals, philosophers, and citizens who disagreed with him constantly. You know what he didn't do? Spend every waking moment trying to convince them all he was right. He made decisions based on his principles, accepted that people would disagree, and moved on with his life. Because he understood something crucial: your peace of mind is worth more than being right. When you say, "We can disagree on this," you're establishing a boundary. You're saying, "I've heard your position, you've heard mine, and I'm comfortable letting this exist without resolution." That's maturity. That's wisdom. That's the opposite of what social media has trained everyone to do, which is fight to the death over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. But here's the real magic. This phrase preserves relationships. You know how many friendships have been destroyed because two people couldn't let go of being right about something that ultimately doesn't matter? Thousands. Millions. When you can disagree without making it personal, without making it a referendum on someone's intelligence or character, you become one of those rare people who can maintain relationships across ideological divides. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, your ego's need to be right is the enemy of your growth. When you can say, "We can disagree on this," and mean it, you're prioritizing wisdom over ego. You're choosing peace over validation. And that choice, repeated over time, transforms you into someone people actually want to be around. Now we've covered how to acknowledge, deflect, appreciate, understand, and accept disagreement. But what about when you actually need to express that you're not okay with something? That's where phrase number 6 comes in, and it's an absolute masterclass in assertive communication. Phrase number 6, "That doesn't work for me." No explanation. No justification. No 3-paragraph essay on why your boundaries are valid. Just a simple, clean statement of fact. That doesn't work for me. Done. The Stoics were big on boundaries even if they didn't call them that. Seneca wrote extensively about protecting your time, your energy, and your peace. He said, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And you know what one of the biggest time wasters is? Over-explaining yourself to people who don't actually care about your reasons. They just want you to comply. When you say, "That doesn't work for me," you're exercising what the Stoics called autonomy, self-governance. You're not asking permission. You're not seeking approval. You're stating a reality. This doesn't work for you. Period. End of discussion. Here's why this is so powerful. Most people are conditioned to justify their boundaries. "I can't do that because..." And then they launch into a story about their schedule, their health, their commitments, basically providing a defense attorney's closing argument for why they're allowed to say no. But here's the thing, you don't owe anyone that explanation. When you over-explain, you're implicitly suggesting that your boundary needs external validation to be legitimate. It doesn't. Think about it from a Stoic perspective. Marcus Aurelius made decisions that affected millions of lives. Do you think he justified every single one to every single person who questioned him? Of course not. He made decisions based on his principles and moved forward. You're the emperor of your own life. Act like it. But, and this is crucial, this phrase only works if you're actually okay with potential consequences. The Stoics were hardcore about this. You can control your choices, but you can't control outcomes. So when you say, "That doesn't work for me," to your boss, your friend, your family member, you have to be prepared for them to respond in ways you don't like. They might be disappointed. They might be angry. They might try to manipulate you into changing your mind. And that's where your Stoic training kicks in. You've already determined what's within your control, your boundary, and what's not, their reaction, and you're at peace with both. This is where most people fail. They set a boundary, someone pushes back, and they immediately crumble because they can't handle the discomfort of someone else's negative emotion. But the Stoics trained themselves to be comfortable with discomfort. They practiced negative visualization, imagining worst-case scenarios, not to be pessimistic but to be prepared. So when you say, "That doesn't work for me," and someone gets upset, you've already mentally rehearsed this moment. Their anger doesn't surprise you. It doesn't control you. It's just weather passing through. Alright, we've covered 6 phrases that'll make you sound wiser than Yoda with a philosophy degree. But the final phrase? This one ties everything together and might just be the most powerful communication tool in your arsenal. Phrase number 7, I need time to think about this. If the previous 6 phrases were about managing external conflict, this one is about honoring your internal process. And the Stoics? They were absolutely militant about this. Epictetus taught his students that the single most important skill they could develop was the pause between stimulus and response. Something happens, and in that microsecond before you react, you have a choice. Most people skip right over that choice and react from emotion, ego, or habit. But wise people, they pause. They create space. They think. When you say, I need time to think about this, you're exercising that pause on a macro level. You're refusing to be pressured into immediate responses just because someone else wants one. You're prioritizing thoughtful decision-making over reactive people-pleasing. You're basically saying, your urgency is not my emergency, except you're saying it in a way that sounds mature instead of dismissive. Marcus Aurelius would literally stop everything to write in his journal, processing his thoughts and emotions before making major decisions. This is a guy running an empire during constant military threats and political intrigue, and he still prioritized reflection time. If he could do it while managing ancient Rome, you can do it when your friend asks you to commit to their destination wedding in Bali. Here's the psychological brilliance of this phrase. It completely reframes the power dynamic. When someone makes a request or presents a situation that requires your response, there's an implicit assumption that you need to respond immediately. By saying you need time, you're rejecting that assumption. You're taking control of the timeline. You're asserting that your decision-making process is more important than their convenience. And you know what happens when you consistently do this? People start respecting your decision-making. They start trusting that when you do give an answer, it's thoughtful and considered, not just whatever you blurted out under pressure. Your yes means something. Your no means something. You become known as someone who thinks before they speak, which in today's world of instant reactions and hot takes, is basically a superpower. But here's the really advanced move. This phrase also protects you from manipulation. Manipulative people rely on pressure and urgency. They need you to respond before you have time to recognize what they're doing. I need this answer now. You have to decide today. Everyone else has already agreed. When you calmly respond with, I need time to think about this, you're throwing a wrench in their entire strategy. You're refusing to be rushed. You're trusting your process over their pressure. The Stoics called this prohairesis, your moral purpose, your capacity to choose. It's the one thing that's entirely within your control, and it's sacred. When you protect your decision-making process, you're protecting your prohairesis. You're saying, I will not be rushed into choices that affect my life, my values, or my peace. So there you have it. 7 phrases that'll make you sound like you've got life figured out, even on days when you absolutely don't. I see your perspective. That's one way to look at it. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Help me understand your thinking. We can disagree on this. That doesn't work for me. And, I need time to think about this. But here's the thing the Stoics really want you to understand. These aren't magic spells. They're not going to work if you're just reciting them like a robot while internally you're still a mess of emotions and reactivity. The real work is internal. It's training yourself to actually be the calm, thoughtful person these phrases suggest you are. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, these guys didn't just talk philosophy. They lived it. They practiced it daily. They screwed up, learned, and tried again. That's what made them wise. Not perfection. Practice. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one of these phrases. Just one. And for the next week, practice using it intentionally. Notice how people respond. Notice how you feel. Notice how it shifts the energy of conversations. Then come back, drop a comment, and let me know which phrase you tried and what happened. I read every single comment, and honestly, some of your stories are better than anything I could write. And if you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button because we're diving deep into Stoic wisdom every single week, breaking down ancient philosophy in ways that actually help you navigate modern life without losing your mind. This is practical wisdom for the real world, not some academic theory that sounds good on paper but falls apart the moment your coworker Derek opens his mouth. Remember, you can't control other people. You can't control circumstances. But you can control how you respond. And that, my friend, is where your power lives. Now go out there and sound wise instead of angry. The world needs more Stoics and fewer people yelling at each other on the internet. I'll see you in the next one. Stay stoic.